I've seen a question from a buy-to-let property investor who's trying to buy a property from a landlord with a tenant in place, but that tenant has not been paying rent. So this investor quite rightly has asked, should I still buy this property? Is it a good investment? And how much is it going to cost me? I wanted to share this answer with everybody because I've seen a massive increase in the number of property investors that want to buy a ready-made, ready-tenanted buy-to-let property. And I've also seen a massive increase in the number of landlords that want to sell a tenanted property. It's a way for a landlord to exit from a property and release the cash without having to wait until the end of a tenancy or without having to evict a tenant. And it's also a way for an investor to get income from a property from day one. So I get it. I can definitely see that. I've been running a landlord to landlord property sales service for the last few years, and it just keeps getting more and more popular because more and more people want to buy these types of properties. And I've even bought a few properties myself where there was a tenant in place when I bought it. So I see great opportunities for investors to buy really good investment deals that are already tenanted. But in this instance, it's really important to understand a few things. So I'm going to share with you how I would calculate this specific property deal where there's currently a tenant in place and that tenant is not paying rent. Now remember, a good property investment deal is a good property investment deal. It doesn't matter about the situation or the circumstances as long as you calculate them and you turn them into numbers. And the first thing we've got to do is calculate on this example the true investment that we're going to have to make. And that's not just your purchase price or your deposit or your legal fees, stamp duty or anything like that. We need to calculate for the worst case scenario. And you know my rule here. You work out what is the worst case scenario and you turn it into a number. And this situation is no different. So if you buy this property, then you will have to evict the tenant. Unless they start paying rent and everything's all okay, you'll have to evict this tenant because they're not paying rent. Now, it could take you 8 months to evict this tenant. It could. It probably won't, but it might. It might take 8 months. So you need to work out what is the cost of this property for you owning it for 8 months. How much is that going to cost you? So as an example, if you're going to spend £500 a month on owning this property, including your mortgage payments, your insurance payments, your management fees, and so on, for 8 months, it's going to cost you £4,000 to own this property while you're evicting the tenant with no income. So that's what it's going to cost you. And then you need to work out what's it going to take or how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost to re-let this property. So for an example, it might take another 2 months of ownership before the next tenant moves in. So that means you're going to spend another £1,000 on that 2 months of letting the property out. And then you'll probably have to spend out for letting fees as well. So let's just say in that whole experience, you've bought the property. It's taken you 8 months, 4,000 quid to evict the tenant. Then it's taken you 2 months, 1,000 quid to re-let the property. And then it's cost you another 500 quid in letting fees or costs or whatever it may be. You now know that your investment in evicting, re-letting is £6,500. So that's your investment. Because remember, your investment isn't just buying the property. Your investment is what you have to invest in the property to achieve a return. So that 8 months eviction, 2 months letting, and all the costs within are part of your total investment. It's not just about owning the property. So look, there are other things to add into that. You might have to pay a couple of months of council tax. You might have to pay court fees. All of those sorts of things all add on to your total investment. Now, a lot of people would be scared off by this. Nobody wants to inherit a tenant that doesn't pay rent, and nobody wants to let their properties to a tenant that doesn't pay rent. But as long as you put a number on it and you know what it could cost you, then you can prepare for that. So now we know on this property, if he buys this property and he has to evict and relet, then it could take 10 months of ownership, which is going to cost $6,500, right? A very blunt calculation, but you get the idea. So now this investor knows that that is part of his investment. He can calculate his offer accordingly. If he's going to buy this property for $100,000 and it's going to cost him $30,000 in cash plus the $6,500 that it's going to cost to evict and relet, and that still fits within his yield targets, i.e. the return on his investment, go for it. You may well be able to pick up some really good property investment deals from landlords where a tenant isn't paying rent if you just account and calculate and forecast for the cost that it's going to be or the investment you're going to have to make. Now, here's a really good point. If it's rent arrears, you can apply to the courts to recover those rent arrears. Now, yeah, you could make the argument if the tenant can't afford to pay the rent, then you're never going to get your rent. But if you go to the courts and you state your case that that tenant owes £4,000 in rent or £5,000, £6,000, whatever it may be, in rent, you have a good chance of getting that rent back. So it's not all lost, but you still have to invest to get that return on investment. So just to summarize that little part, and I've got a couple of other points that I want to definitely make to you here, but just to summarize that point, the first thing you need to do is work out what your investment is going to have to be on that property investment deal, and you structure your offer, you structure the deal around the total investment, not just owning it. And try not to miss any potential costs out either. There could be a few extra little things, like I've said, court fees, solicitors' fees. Maybe the letting agent charges you for serving notices and applying to the courts and appearing in court and so on. And that's all fine. That's great. You should always let the experts do what the experts do. But just know that it may well come at a cost. And as long as you build that into your total investment requirement, your cash requirement, whatever you want to call it, then you should be prepared for that and you can build it into your overall investment deal. The last thing, or the next point I want to make to you is do not compromise on that. I see so many property investors desperate to just own the property and forget about the other costs involved. I've done it myself. I've been so desperate to buy a property deal because I think it's the brilliant deal and I want that property at all costs. I then didn't really take into account a few extra costs that came about. It just reduced my profit, reduced my yield. Would I have still bought that property? Yeah, absolutely, but it was a bit of a shock to the system that I wanted to share with you just now. So don't compromise on your yield targets. If you've got a property investment opportunity and you work out the total investment and the total return on investment and it doesn't tick your boxes, don't buy it. And the last thing I would say is make an offer. Doesn't matter what the offer is. You calculate your total investment, you calculate your return on investment, and you calculate what you are able to pay to achieve your yield targets and make that offer. Never don't make an offer. It's one of the worst things you can do, not offering. So to summarize all of this property investor is buying a buy-to-let property from a landlord where there's a tenant in place who's not paying rent. It could take 8 months to evict. That could cost you $4,000. Then there's a couple of months of reletting. That's all included in your total investment that you're going to make on this property. So good luck with that purchase. I hope this helps and I hope it still fits and it's still a good property investment deal. If it's not, it's just a pile of bricks. There's another pile of bricks down the road. Don't worry about it too much. There's plenty of investment deals out there. All right, speak to you all soon.